Hello, and welcome to Using Technology Effectively, Distance Learning in Biology. I'm Tara Jo Holmberg, and I am a full-time professor at Northwestern Connecticut Community College in the Biology and Environmental Sciences. I just want to say thank you to the National Association of Biology Teachers and the Introductory Biology Task Force for inviting me to speak on this topic. Hello. I'd like to give you a little bit of a background so that you know where I'm coming from for this webinar. The first is that I've taught a large number of majors and mixed majors courses, including introductory biology in my time at the community college where I work. I've pretty much prepped all of the different courses with the exception of anatomy and physiology, which gives me a breadth of experience coming into this workshop today. I also have 20 years of online teaching. Primarily, the online teaching has been in environmental science, earth science, and science and society, but I've also taught most of my courses in a hybrid setting at one time or another, which means one of two things. Either I've taught the lecture half on ground, half online, or I've taught the lecture fully online and the lab on ground. Before this fall, we have never taught our labs online, but we are going into this fall teaching our introductory biology course fully online, lecture and lab for the first time. I have 15 years in faculty development, both in STEM development, but also in interdisciplinary faculty professional development. And finally, I live and work in Northwest Connecticut, which is a beautiful part of the country. If you ever have a chance to come and visit, I highly recommend it. It is quite lovely at any time of the year, except for maybe January. I also live with two silly furry friends named Julius in the front and Sarah in the back. And I really like this picture because I think it captures both of their personalities. Some of you on watching this video will know them, but many of you don't. And I just like to have an opportunity to share them with you because they are quite adorable. So my introduction actually leads us into the first principle today, which is the principle of dissolving your screen with your students. So whether you're teaching your course as a split course, meaning some of your students are inside of your classroom with you and some are taking the class online at home, some are taking a hybrid class where they meet with you on given days and then they're at home on given days, or they're taking the course with you completely online. Making a connection with your students is critically important if you are not face-to-face with them as we normally are with our students. And that principle, which is actually used in a number of different realms within technology, is called dissolving your screen. And it's really about removing that barrier that exists between screens, between, in this case, a faculty member and their students. So letting your students get to know you is critically important. But I would say, with a caveat, only let your students know as much as you're willing to let them know about you. For example, in the first day, we do course introductions. Now, again, I'm only willing to share some parts of my life with my students. And so in this case, instead of doing a video, I'm doing a written example with them. And as you can see, it's a little bit long, but I want to give them a background on my science. I want to give them a background on where I've lived because I've lived all around the country. The feeling that I got at meeting one of my science heroes, and then the picture that you just saw of my dogs, because that makes me more of a person than just a science teacher, than just somebody delivering content to them. They know that I have dogs, and for many students, having pets makes an instant connection. So my students then are asked to do an introduction back, and they again only share what they're comfortable sharing. Another way that you can dissolve the screen is by keeping in touch with your students outside of whatever learning management system or whatever other way that you are delivering content. So one of the ways that I keep in touch with my students, and it's probably been one of the best things that I found in the last few years to both engage students and retain students, is an app called Remind. Now, I use Remind. There's plenty of other apps out there. If you are teaching in secondary school, You probably know about Remind. It's very popular in K-12 school districts. If you are in higher ed, it's less well known. But again, there are other apps out there. But this is an app where I can communicate with my students through my phone or through my laptop, like I'm texting with students, but they don't have my cell phone number and I don't have their cell phone number, which leads to a little bit of anonymity, and that's nice when the class is done. They don't continue to have my cell phone number. And you can see that this was from a summer course. I had put an announcement up first to the whole class, and a student had emailed me and said that she wasn't sure if one of her assignments went through. I wasn't sure if she was going to check her email, but I knew that she was on the app. So I responded through the app. She got back to me right away and let me know that this is why she had particular issues finding out the answer to her question. This is a low threshold technology. Most students are used to texting with their friends or family. And so by texting back and forth with me or getting announcements, or sometimes I put in little gifts and things like that to kind of motivate them and let them know I'm thinking about where we are in the course, that they can do this, that it's going to be okay, that I'm interacting where they are. I'm not forcing them into a platform, for example, our college email that I know our students don't check. So instead, I'm going to where they are. It's a very simple sign up, and it's a way to engage and dissolve that screen so that I am there. I'm not pushy, but I'm there to kind of let them know that we're still in this thing together, and I'm thinking about you, and I know where we are, and I know that sometimes it gets a little tough, but I'm here to help. So this goes with trauma-informed teaching. And Jessica Minahan from Trauma-Informed Teaching Strategy says, when teachers are proactive and responsive to the needs of students suffering from traumatic stress and make small changes in the classroom that foster a feeling of safety, it makes a huge difference in their ability to learn. And I think especially in this time of a pandemic, we are all feeling some level of trauma in one way or another. And it may only get stronger as we move through these various semesters. And so to think about ways and strategies that you can build these sorts of empathy into your course, to think about ways that you can build in that resilience within your course to let students know we're still going to cover this content and it's still going to be a challenging course, but I'm here for you. All those things are going to help your students out in the end. And our next point is being as inclusive and equitable in your course as possible. So whose voice is being included in your course? What materials are you choosing? What scientists are you making a point of including? Who gets a seat at the STEM table and gets to be heard? So one of the things to think about when it comes to inclusivity and equitability, and it's usually the first thing that comes up when you're talking about online courses, is what's called universal design for learning. And there's a whole host of different resources out there, but this is addressing the ability for individuals of any ability to access your content. So anyone with a disability can get the same access and get the same outcomes out of your course as anyone else. So I like the next graphic because it points out that especially when we're talking about any disability, some are permanent, some are temporary, and some are situational. And we will never know what's going on with a student, especially in a distance learning situation, at any one time. So for example, in a hearing situation, I happen to teach at a community college where we have a large deaf and hard of hearing population. I'm very used to working with interpreters, and the first time that I started working with deaf and hard of hearing students in my online courses, it was very much oh, I should have been doing this from the start, because I have students in my courses that have temporary hearing disabilities, and also students that are trying to take courses that are in very noisy households, which would be situational. And so there they have a hard time hearing the content sometimes as well. And so best practices say anything that you have that's auditory should also have a transcript and or be closed captioned. And that way it's equitable for all. And so when you're designing your course content, make sure that if you use a resource, for example, like a podcast, that the podcast has a transcript with it. If it doesn't, either be prepared to make one or don't use that particular resource and go on to find something else. The next thing is to talk about equity and inclusion in a larger scale. So in terms of science, we have definitely not brought all voices to the table. One project that I had engaged in a couple of years ago in my botany course was to try and start to bring in voices other than the traditional voices within botany to show my students the breadth and depth of all of the different contributions from people of different races, different ethnicities, different cultures, different religions throughout time. And so going back as far as I could find, in terms of ethnobotany back 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years that were actually attributed to different individuals or different cultures, all the way up through modern day Nobel Prize laureates, and trying to bring to them the stories and the different faces and the different voices that reflected not only my students, but also reflected what had been brought to the field of botany and science in general that was not necessarily as well known, not necessarily in their textbooks, but should be. And so I really encourage everyone to go out and find these stories yourself and bring them into your courses. They are not, unfortunately, all in one database. You really need to do the hard work. Some fields are better than others about kind of collating this, but in many cases, it's really about us going out and finding those stories. So our next point is KonMari your course. Less is more. Your course should not spark pain. It may not spark joy, but it should definitely not spark pain. So when we think about our course, we love biology. That's why we do this. We love biology and we want to share as much as absolutely possible with our students. But when it comes to online, especially, we really need to parse out what is critical knowledge for our students and what are our nice to haves. If we think about the last time we went to a website, did we read every single piece of text on that website from start to finish? No. We went to the pieces that we were looking for that were critical for us for our needs at that time. So parsing out what is critical knowledge is really important. That is the stuff to focus on. And then you can still have the nice to haves, but it could be student choice. It could be in a folder titled additional materials or optional. So students could go and learn about that on their own, but it's not crucial for their understanding of the course. Now this all comes down to the basics of backwards design. So in the traditional course plan, and we've all done this, we've all been there. We're either given or have a textbook, and then writing our syllabus, then writing and revising lectures, preparing our PowerPoints and lesson plans from that, and then writing our exams and problem sets. It's very instructor-centered based on what we know and what will work best for us within our timeline and what makes sense to us in our heads. And many times this is based on how we were taught and how we learned best. But with more and more biological educational research coming out, it's clearer that backwards design makes more sense for our students. And so that's where we figure out what is that critical knowledge, and those are our learning goals. So what are the big picture things that we really want our students to have and be able to take away by the end of the course? What are they going to need to be successful in their careers, for transfer, for the next class that they're taking? And it can't be everything. From there, we set measurable learning outcomes. Now, depending on where you are and what size your department is, sometimes these are already given to you. Sometimes you may need to parse them out yourself. From there, designing your course layout. And so in an online course, this is critical. I'm going to talk about this more in a minute, But figuring out how your course is actually going to functionally work before you do anything else, setting that up, and then from there, doing your assessments, developing your learning activities, and that way it's student-centered. So clarity is key. And if you notice, I've used this particular slide deck, which is pretty clear. It's got a clear font. The color scheme is pretty simple. There's not a lot of distraction happening, and your focus tends to be pulled towards where I want your focus to be pulled. Design matters. So let's consider some logistics when it comes to building our courses. The first is consistent and attractive layout and conventions, keeping naming conventions the same, keeping our fonts the same, avoiding the use of bold, italics, lots of different colors. We want to really avoid chaos in our courses. We want things to be pretty clear and concise when it comes to instructions, but also recognizing that we're going to miss some things along the way, and that's okay. And so we want to take it easy on ourselves. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, missing instruction or two along the way, being a little less clear than maybe we wanted to be. These are all learning experiences for us. Students will often catch those and let you know. Recognize that, vocalize, let the student know that yes, they're right, that was something I missed, and acknowledge those areas of struggle that are going to be more difficult for students, especially in an online course where instructions are maybe really complex and they're going to have maybe a more difficult time. Those are actually really good times, by the way, to do maybe a short video or do a short mini podcast of what you're looking for them to do. Podcast again with a transcript and video with closed captioning so that they can kind of see from you what it is that you're expecting. If you are going to list your instructions, use bullets. So step 1, step 2, step 3, and each bullet shouldn't be a paragraph. It should really be step 1, step 2, step 3. And I ran our first kind of test pilot online lab this summer, and I will say it was one of the most challenging online builds I've ever had, because all of those little instructions, all the little reteaching that you give to students along the way when you're with them in a classroom, that stuff all needs to be anticipated and written down, and it's very difficult to capture that the first time out. So try your best, recognize that there might be some areas that you missed, and be gentle with yourself. Be explicit with your expectations of students. So students may not know, it may not be clear to them why they're doing a particular thing in your course. Connect it back to those learning objectives from your class, but also be explicit as to why they're doing this particular thing. In a course, you would say, we're going to do this now because it connects exactly to what we were just learning about, etc., etc. They don't have those transitions between units or lessons or activities for you to be there to guide them through that. So really being explicit and tell them why they're doing particular things can be so helpful. And again, help your student success and help students. So this is an example a little bit about layout. This is, at my college, we use Blackboard for our LMS, but I know there are multiple kinds. I just wanted to show this in terms of how my layout is for one of my courses. This happens to be environmental science, but I do the same thing in our bio course. So in this case, they are labeled as units. So no matter where my students are looking, they see a unit, and the unit is a topic. And so here we have Unit 1. It's Science and Understanding the Environment. It tells them what's in this folder, reminds them to look for the due dates in the calendar, and it tells them what their assignment's going to be in this unit. When they go into that unit, this is the layout they see every single time. The first one is their readings. The next one is anything they need to watch, and I give these little helpful tips. And then the last one is due, which is their assignments. I leave that last because I really want them to make sure to go through the other materials first before they go and do their assignment. So, flipping your model. If you do have any face-to-face time, either as a live synchronous video or with in your classroom for limited amounts of time with your students, really work on facilitation of discussion, facilitation of whatever activities that you can do in a physically distanced way with your students, and work on leaving any lecture type materials for the online portion of your course. So one way we can think about design in our course and flipping is how much chunking of material we do, which is really important in an online course, just as it is in an on-ground course. So no more time should be spent in an online class taking and reading materials and going through activities than they would be in a traditional face-to-face on-ground class. And so just like a puzzle, they shouldn't have more pieces given to them in an online class than they would have in a traditional class in order to make the whole. Remember that less is more in an online class. We're really going for that critical content, and online courses often take more attention and time. They take more of our students' bandwidth, and many of our students would not otherwise be taking online or hybrid courses if it weren't for this current situation we find ourselves in. In terms of assessments, really thinking ahead what kind of assessments you want to use, when you want to use them, how long they'll take, and they're always going to take longer for students than we anticipate. If you're going to do some sort of lecturing or have lecturing types of materials, which are totally fine, try to keep them within 10 to 15 minute blocks, even less if you possibly can. There's also no need to reinvent the wheel. I feel really strongly about this, that re-recording lectures when there may already be one out there that does it just as well and covers things in a shorter amount of time than you might is really often the way to go. And I often share materials from a whole host of different YouTube channels with my students because they've done a really great job with it. They've got a lot of bells and whistles in maybe 7 minutes that might take me 30 minutes to do because I don't have those bells and whistles to animate and show things in a much cleaner and quicker way that somebody else does. Also, active learning, so important in an on-ground class. So while it may be easier to just take all the lecture material and tests and put that on ground, that's not where the learning happens. The learning happens through formative assessments and active learning as part of those formative assessments. So things like inquiry and project-based learning, interactive discussions, areas of reflection and metacognition, all can be done really well in an online class, can all be done really well in an online class. And it's highly recommended that you use as much of these strategies as you possibly can in an online course. So Wyman's pretty famous paper from 2014 in PNAS shows what happens when instructors start to use active learning in their courses. This is a meta-analysis looking at active learning versus a straight traditional lecture format within STEM courses. And what happens here is you can see that the percent of students in the class and failure rates, and lecturing in on average, just under 35% of the students will fail. That drops to just about 22% when you start to use active learning. So this is a whole host of students that are retained in the course by using active learning. And in fact, test scores go up measurably and significantly using active learning as well. Now, the flip side of this is students find active learning harder because they're not sitting passively listening, they're doing a lot of work. And so this is where metacognition comes in, where you talk to students about learning strategies, study strategies, and again, being explicit and transparent about why you're using that particular activity to teach them that particular part of the content. And so teaching through active learning and teaching through any of these inquiry-based and interactive project-based learning, et cetera, can all be another way to teach versus having them actually just sit and watch a video or read a text. So I wanted to give some suggestions on other places that you can find some inquiry and interactive types of activities to use in your courses so that you're not reinventing the wheel. These have been vetted, they've been peer reviewed, and they are highly recommended. I've used all of these at one time or another, and I'm planning to use all of them in the fall. So the first are data nuggets, and we have the Buffalo case studies, Science in the Classroom, which are annotated primary journal articles, CourseSource. Students can do citizen science projects through Zooniverse, and HHMI Biointeractive resources. And just to be fully clear and transparent, I'm also a teacher ambassador for HHMI Biointeractive, but I'm not here on behalf of them today. So last but not least is reconsidering our assessments. So considering more formative and less high stakes assessments for our students. So formative assessments are frequent low stakes to no stakes homework or other small scale assignments that you give to your students so you get feedback on where they are, crucial since you can't see their faces and interact with them as you would in an on-ground course. But also so they get some feedback, and that can help with reteaching them for the next time so that they are continually improving throughout the course. So the first kind of a formative assessment are discussions. And discussions are really meant for interaction between students about a topic. I would not, however, use discussions for things that really should be an assignment. So for example, if you're doing a case study and most of the students are going to be turning in similar answers, I would not use a discussion for that. I would use an assignment. Something like a Dropbox, something where they're going to be putting all of their assignments in separately where they can't see each other's work. Discussions should really be for interaction, not for independent work that they're just turning in the same work. Next are interactive videos, which you can make to have Q&A or questions throughout the video, really helpful. Low stakes collaborative projects or assignments. One thing to consider about this time that we're in is to not make high stakes collaborative projects. We can't anticipate what's going to happen in different students' lives, in different students' families with work schedules, health, finances, housing, any number of different things. And having high stakes collaborative projects at this time could really set a lot of students off on a path of high stress. I would make any collaborative projects fairly low stakes and make them as easy to work with each other as possible. Frequent small quizzes, metacognitive reflections, lab activities are often formative assessments. Frequent homework in whatever way that works for you. Low stakes projects and explorations, maybe of topics that they find interesting. For example, how coronavirus and introductory biology work together. And even gamified assignments, something like Kahoot, can be really useful for this time to kind of get them to think about biology in a different, fun way. So for summative mastery assignments, things like problem-based learning, a bigger project that they're working on over a longer period of time. Working on long-term interrupted case studies that they can follow throughout a semester on a topic. Grounded place-based assessments. Exams of comprehension. So these would not be considered the traditional large-scale, really high-stakes midterm and final. These are more frequent, smaller exams of comprehension that you have designed yourself, not necessarily designed from a textbook, but instead are really grounded in the material that you've been providing to your students and the previous formative assessments that they've been using. Meaningful projects. So I say meaningful projects because I want to stay away from projects for the sake of doing a project. These projects should, as summative, should only be really used if they have connections to the content, that they are used in place of a different summative type of assignment. So for example, doing a project instead of the final exam, and that they really will have long-term impacts and feedback for students moving on in STEM. And finally, reflective writing, which maybe does not get enough airtime within STEM, but for our students can really help them think on their own particular learning, how they've been doing, how science is impacting their lives and the lives of the people around them, and grounds it further into why they want to go into a STEM field. So as I finish my video, I like to share this particular picture because it shows really what we're all about. It shows students working together, trying to solve a problem that we've given them in science. It shows them engaged, sometimes arguing, sometimes frustrated. And we all want to get to a place where we can have a classroom that looks like this again. And I'm hoping we do. In the meantime, we can all also try our best to make an online course as close to this kind of experience as possible. So using whatever technology we have available to us, using best practices for online teaching, using capacities that we have within us to engage and retain our students and to let them know that we're thinking about them and that we care for them and that we want the best for them, in addition to being content experts and having high expectations for them, but that we really are all in this together and that we all have the same end goal, which is trying to work through and that we all have the same end goal, which is having a healthy, productive semester in an introductory biology course. So with that, I want to thank you. And if you have any questions, you can find me at tarajoholmberg@gmail.com. And I've just rejoined Twitter at EduTeach. So thank you.